Yes.
Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone for the Sunday morning session on science of self-realization. All of you would have been busy with yesterday late night program. You will be busy with all your other programs. Nevertheless, we wanted to go on with our regular programs. So I wish you a very happy New Year to all of you. And let us begin our session. Before we begin our session, let's offer our prayers to Prabhupada and Lord Krishna. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Welcome everyone for the Science of Self-Realization session. We have been speaking from this book, The Science of Self-Realization, since almost 1 year. So today we are going to have a new topic for all of you. The topic's name is Soul Research. Very interesting topic. So this is actually interaction of Prabhupada with one very famous heart surgeon from Canada in a letter. So what is that background? How Prabhupada explained about the various aspects of the soul, we will see in today's presentation. So all these sessions we are having by the inspiration of His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, who has so mercifully given us teachings in the form of his books, in the form of his lectures, in the form of his letters like this, which is giving us a wonderful insight into the spiritual dimension of our existence. Otherwise, it would have been so difficult for us to understand the practical aspects of our life. So we owe a great, sense of, acknowledgement to Prabhupada, obligation to Prabhupada with regard to following whatever Prabhupada has told us to do. So the background of this session is that a heart surgeon, he wanted to know what a soul is. In 1972, a distinguished panel met in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. That is about 50 years ago. Their point of discussion was problems associated with attempts to define the exact moment of death. Right? Because they have been doing some research with regard to people who are about to die, and they wanted to define the when the person dies. What is that which is not there in the body of a person when so far he was alive and just now he has left his body. So what happened to him? What is that aspect which is missing in him? So, and where that particular aspect which is so much there in his body has left the body and is gone somewhere. This is what they wanted to research. This is what scientists and doctors want to understand. So a very distinguished panel met in 1972 in Canada to discuss on this point. Very important aspect, because this is what all of us would like to know also. The problem associated with attempts to define the exact moment of death. So the panel members included world famous heart surgeon Dr. Wilfred Bigelow, Mr. Justice Edson L. Hines of Ontario, of the Supreme Court, and one more gentleman by name Eric Leddy, president of the University of Ontario, which means very eminent people were part of this panel, and they're all thinking about this aspect of what happens to the person at the final moment of his life. At point of death, what changes happen? Now, where is that particular aspect in his body which left the body? We want to capture that in our camera or our whatever instruments we have. So Dr. Bigelow upheld the existence of the soul and urged systematic research to determine what the soul is and where it comes from. Dr. Bigelow is a famous heart surgeon, as we just now discussed. So he wanted to, in fact, understand whether this soul really exists. And he wanted to have a very systematic research to understand whether the soul exists, if it exists, where it comes from, where it goes. It is a mystery which all of us will have. Will have this question, right? All of us would like to know about the mystery of a life. And so far, the body was alive, it was so active, animating. Suddenly, the person has left his body. What happened to him? Right? What is that particular aspect in his life that left his body? Right? All of us will be very anxious to know about this. So Dr. Bigelow's and other panelists' comments were later published in the Montreal Gazette. So later on, whatever these panelists had discussed and commented upon these aspects, very vital aspects about the final moments of a person who is about to die, and they were all discussing, and they have published this in one gazette known as Montreal Gazette. So this article, what is published in Montreal Gazette, came to the attention of Srila Prabhupada. Then he wrote a very nice letter to Dr. Bigelow, giving a substantial Vedic knowledge of the science of the soul. It's a very important aspect because Prabhupada always explained spiritual understanding as a science. It's not simply some concoction or some thinking or some way of presentation without any proper background. No, it's a scientific presentation Prabhupada gave. And Prabhupada gave a practical method for scientifically understanding it. This is what scientists want. Scientists want, how do you know that soul is there and where it comes from, where it goes, how do you recognize the soul is right? These are the questions which they had. So for which Prabhupada offered a very practical, practical solution to all of them, this letter. So Prabhupada's response with the Vedic evidence is below. So Prabhupada opens his letter by writing, "My dear Dr. Bigelow, please accept my greetings. Recently, I have read an article in the Gazette by Roy Corelli entitled, Heart Surgeon Wants to Know What a Soul Is." And it was very interesting because, Prabhupada, as an Acharya, he would like to always give out the Vedic understanding to any serious seeker about the spiritual knowledge, which want to know anything about spirit, anything about Supreme Spirit Krishna. Prabhupada always is anxious to answer them. So about the soul, this particular article was there, and you're very very nicely you have written your article about many aspects of the soul. So I am interested to know, interested to answer your question. Prabhupada is telling. Prabhupada writes, "Your comments show great insight, and I thought to write on this matter." Right? This is the work of it. This is the Acharya conducts his duties. He's always ready to give instructions to anybody who is a serious seeker of knowledge. Prabhupada begins his letter by writing, "Perhaps you may know that I am the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness." Prabhupada is the founder Acharya. Has several temples in Canada, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and Hamilton. Just imagine, 1972, Prabhupada had 4 centers in Canada already. This Krishna consciousness movement is specifically meant to teach every soul his original spiritual position. So Prabhupada is clarifying with regard to the function of Krishna consciousness movement It is basically meant to teach every person. All of us are actually spirit souls. And what is our original situation? What is our spiritual situation? Is what this Krishna consciousness movement is supposed to teach us. So with this, Prabhupada starts explaining about the soul and the consciousness from the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam's perspective. He says, undoubtedly, the soul is present in the heart of the living entity, and it is a source of all energies for maintaining the body. So the question of whether the soul exists or not is answered by Prabhupada here. Yes, the soul is present in the heart of everybody. Right? This is what Krishna says. Sarvasya chaham hridisannivishtaha. In fact, Krishna says, as Paramatma I am staying, and also you, as spirit soul, is within the body. There are two entities in our body. And all of us are actually spirit souls. This is the understanding from Bhagavad Gita. In the very beginning, Krishna gives. He says, Dehi nosmin yatha dehe. You are not this body, you are spirit soul. You are within this body. In the beginning instruction which Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita. So, undoubtedly, the soul is present in the heart of the living entity, and that is the source of all energies. Prabhupada says that is the source of all energies of the living entity. The energy of the soul is spread all over the body, and this is known as consciousness. Soul is the source of all energy, and the energy is spread all over body. And this energy is perceived as consciousness. It's like when something is pricking us somewhere in the body, immediately get a sensation, painful sensation, or something is very pleasant, we feel very nice. So like these sensations of pleasure, pain, happiness, distress is all felt by ourselves because we are present in this body as consciousness. The energy is spread all over the body as consciousness. Since this consciousness spreads the energy of the soul all over the body, one can feel pains and pleasures in any part of the body, right? Because we are conscious, we're able to feel pleasures and pains. But the same aspect with any dead body cannot feel any pleasure and pains. Why? Because the spirit soul is out of the body. Even though the body will have all the necessary organs and all the functions, but the dead body is lacking spirit soul. There's a difference between dead body and a living body. A living body has the spirit soul within it, its existence. Whereas a dead body means the same body without spirit soul. Same, all the organs are all there, all the function, all the various functionaries which are supposed to happen is present. But because the soul is not there, the energy, the source of energy is not there, the body is not responding to various stimuli. The soul is individual and he is transmigrating from one body to another, just as a person transmigrates from babyhood to childhood, from childhood to boyhood, and from boyhood to youth, and then to advanced old age. This is the understanding Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita. But all of us are individual personalities, each of us, individual souls, right? Concrete individual souls. And what is happening right now is we are transmigrating from one body to another. In our own life, you see, from the time we are born up to now, we have gone through different stages of our life. From babyhood to childhood, from childhood to boyhood, boyhood to youthhood, youthhood to adulthood, adulthood to old age. Like this, our body is changing, but we are the same spirit soul. Right? This is the important point which Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita. So what is this transmigration of the soul actually? Prabhupada explains further. The change, what is going on in our body from our birth up to the old age, at that point of time, what happens at one point of time, at the time of when we become very old, the change called death takes place when we get to a new body. Just as when we change our old dress to a new dress, This is called transmigration of the soul, which means soul is transmigrating, which is like, we say a person has migrated himself from India to America. He's transferred himself to a different place. Like that, the soul transfers itself or transmigrating. It's technically called transmigration. Transmigrates from one specific body to the next body. That is called death. It changes just like we change our dress. Today I may be wearing some white sweater. Tomorrow I may wear some red sweater. Like that, the dress, the body changes completely. When a soul wants to enjoy this material world, forgetting his real home in the spiritual world, he takes this life of hard struggle for existence. Prabhupada is giving the essence of the whole Vedic scriptures and telling, why do we come to this material world? When the living entity wants to enjoy this material world, independent of Krishna. Why it wants to enjoy? Because the tendency to enjoy is always there. But when you want to enjoy this material world independently, very nicely one of our acharyas explained. He says, Krishna bhuliya jiva bhoga vanchakare. Which means when a living entity wants to enjoy this material world independent of Krishna, Krishna bhuliya jiva bhoga vanchakare nikatastha maya tare japatiya dhare. Immediately he comes under the influence of this material world, under the three modes of nature, and in that way he's entangled in the material world by taking different bodies. That is the reason. So our actual situation is that to be in the spiritual world happily in the with Lord Krishna as part and parcel of Krishna, but that we have forgotten, and we have come to this material world trying to enjoy in this material world. That is the whole understanding which Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavata gives us. So when a soul wants to enjoy this material world, forgetting his real home in the spiritual world, he takes his life of hard struggle for existence. Then this unnatural life of repeated birth and death and disease and old age can be stopped when this consciousness is dovetailed with the supreme consciousness of God. This is the beauty, the way Prabhupada explains. He's directly explaining the philosophy of what is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavata, that this life, what we go through when we are born, after we are born, we grow, then we experience disease, we experience old age, and one point of time we leave this body and take one more body. That is called death. So Prabhupada says this aspect of birth, death, old age, disease is unnatural for the Atma, because for the Atma there is no birth, there is no death. So this unnatural life can be stopped when the consciousness of ours is dovetailed with supreme consciousness, which means when we understand that we are not this material body, we are actually spirit soul. So as spirit soul, we are supposed to be serving Krishna. It's called dovetailing. So that dovetailing has to happen with supreme consciousness, which means I'll act in accordance with Krishna's direction as given in Bhagavad Gita. Supreme consciousness of God means whatever Lord Krishna has spoken in Bhagavad Gita, I'll try to follow that seriously. That is called supreme consciousness. Dovetailing our consciousness, supreme consciousness. That is the basic principle of our Krishna movement. Prabhupada has established this whole worldwide movement to, in fact, educate everybody in this aspect. Right? This is the basic principle of our Krishna movement. So Prabhupada gives a nice example how transmigration is happening with practical examples and how we are changing our life, birth after birth, what is happening, changing our body, birth after birth, what is happening. Prabhupada gives a practical example. He says, they give the example of heart transplant. See, Prabhupada was very particular. Whenever he spoke to anybody, he would give very practical example of that particular field only. The person who is actually interacting will get the proper understanding of what Prabhupada is conveying or trying to explain. As far as heart transplant is concerned, there is no question of success unless the soul is there in the heart. Nowadays, it has become very common that people, because they have some problem with their functioning of the heart, they want a transplantation, which means they want to replace their present heart with some other proper working heart. So at that time, what happens? A new soul enters? No. The soul is there only in the heart region. The soul is left the body, then even the transplantation will not be successful. That's the point. As far as heart transplant is concerned, unless the soul is present in the heart, which heart? The place where the present operation is happening. The soul leaves the body, transplantation is of no use. It's a failure. Right? The body, in that body, specific body, the soul has to be there. Otherwise, the transplantation is, it is operation failed. Right? So the presence of the soul has to be accepted. Because somebody whose body is dead, anyway, these other bodily parts are like machine parts. That's what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. We are like, our body is like yantra. Yantra rudhani maya, he says. So this yantra, different parts, so for example, in sometimes mechanics, what they do, some other vehicle is fully damaged, is not working. So one more vehicle requires some part, specific part is not available easily. So he'll take from the very old vehicle which is there. That part is anyway there available. He'll take that part and fix it. That's what this heart transplantation means. In some body where the spirit soul has left the body, all the parts are all intact. So you take out that particular part at specific time and you fix it in a body where the heart is having problem. So this body which is actually now alive will only be continuing to work or continuing to act provided the soul continues to be there in the body. That's the point. Otherwise, even though heart transplantation happens, there is no success. So the presence of the soul has to be accepted. Just like in sexual intercourse, if there is no soul, there is no conception or no pregnancy. Right? When the man and woman unite, unless in that specific aspect of sex, the soul has to be there. Otherwise, there is no conception, no pregnancy. Conception deteriorates. If it deteriorates the womb, so that it no longer is a good place for the soul. Sorry, contraception. Contraception deteriorates the soul, the womb, so that there is no longer a good place for the soul. Contraception means nowadays people are using so many methods to stop or rather avoid pregnancy. Right? Contraceptive methods of taking some pills or so many other ways and means. They want to enjoy sex life, but they want to avoid a child or want to avoid pregnancy. So contraception methods are actually those methods wherein you are not allowing the soul inside the womb of the mother. So Prabhupada is telling the contraceptive methods, what presently people are trying to adopt, it deteriorates the womb so that it is no longer good for is no longer good place for the soul. It is against the order of God. Right? You want to enjoy sex life, then you have to take responsibility of the child also. Not that you simply want to enjoy sex life. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, that sex life which is against the religious principles, which is not against the religious principles, is I am. Which means, which is as per rules, regulations of scriptures, is I am. Krishna says. So that which is not against, that which is against rules and regulations of scriptures, Krishna says that is adharma. That is irreligious. So this aspect of using contraceptives to kill child or abortions, etc., is against the order of God. By the order of God, a soul is sent into a particular womb, but by this contraceptive method, he is denied that womb and has to be placed in another, which means he's told, no, you don't enter the womb. It's like Prabhupada gives a nice example. Disobedience to the Supreme. For example, take a man who is supposed to live in a particular apartment. The situation there is so disturbed that he cannot enter the apartment. Then he's put to a great disadvantage. Right? He's supposed to be in that apartment. He's supposed to live in that apartment. That's what was decided. But when he wants to enter that apartment, he's not allowed inside. Right? It becomes a sort of a disadvantage for the person who's supposed to enter into apartment. That is illegal interference and is punishable. Right? So from the perspective of God's arrangement, when you have sex life without responsibility of a child, you want to use contraceptives, that is actually illegal interference with the arrangement Lord has made, and it is punishable by the laws of nature. So, like this Prabhupada explaining, unless these souls, because the soul's presence only, the people we are able to, have new life comes up. It's a very important point Prabhupada is explaining here, that life comes from life. Life is not generated from matter. People have this conception that, just only man and woman unite, they have sex life and child is born. Just because you unite doesn't mean that no child is born. Unless the soul, spirit soul is there in that union, then only then the child is born. Otherwise, simply having sexual intercourse will not produce a child. But the arrangement of the Lord is such that sexual intercourse will invariably have the soul being placed in the womb of the woman. So if the contraception is avoiding, or rather trying to deny the entry of the soul in the womb, trying to make it uncomfortable, then that is against the laws of God. So Prabhupada trying to explain that because of soul's presence, the child is born, or the further embryo growth happens. Otherwise, without the soul's presence, nothing grows. Life comes from life. Life doesn't come from matter. Is the point Prabhupada is trying to explain in this particular aspect. So further, Prabhupada gives a very nice, wonderful understanding from scriptures about the soul's dimension. He says, the undertaking of soul research would certainly mark the advancement of science. Prabhupada is appreciating that soul research, what you have mentioned in your in the article, which you are all trying to understand, is a very important aspect, and it's going to give a very big breakthrough in the whole scientific world. But advancement of science with regard to what you're trying to do, you will not be able to find the soul. The way you're trying to research, that is not the way. What is the way? The soul's presence can simply be accepted on circumstantial understanding. Right? We have to understand it in a proper way, and that way, Prabhupada explains, you will find in the Vedic literature that the dimension of the soul is 1/10,000 the size of a point. Soul's understanding should be accepted from Vedic literatures. Vedic literature says that the soul's size is so small, so minute, it is 1/10,000 the size of a point. The material scientist cannot measure the length and breadth of a point. The point is so small that we cannot measure the length and breadth of that particular aspect of point. Therefore, it is not possible for the material scientist to capture the soul. So your material instruments, scientific material instruments or advancement in whatever field, you cannot know the soul by your method. The method is to know from Vedic literatures. You can simply accept the soul's existence by taking it from authority. This is the method. So Prabhupada is trying to tell this Dr. Bijalo, that understanding soul by any scientific research, your way, scientific way as modern scientific way, that will not help you to know about the soul. If you accept the Vedic authority, the process given in the Vedic understanding, that will help you to know the soul's existence. What the greatest scientists are finding, we explained long ago. You are trying to do research now, but many millions of years ago, the science about the soul, science of the soul, already Krishna has explained in his teachings of Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavata. That's what Prabhupada is saying here. So, a specific question of where is the soul and where does it come from is answered by Prabhupada in the next part of his letter. He says, as soon as one understands the existence of the soul, he can immediately understand the existence of God. Because Soul is part and parcel of God. When you know about the soul, you understand about God. Why? Because when you see the sunlight, then immediately you get the understanding that there is sunshine. Sunlight cannot be independent. Sunlight has a source. So the source of the soul is super soul or Paramatma, Lord Krishna. The difference between God and the soul is that God is very great soul and the living entity is a very small soul, but qualitatively they are equal. Right? So God is called super soul or great soul. We're all small souls or anu, small living entities we are. And that one supreme entity, Lord Krishna, is maintaining all of us. Qualitatively, we are all same, having all same spiritual qualities. But quantitatively, we are different. That's the point Prabhupada is trying to make here. Therefore, God is all pervading and the living entity is localized. Localized means we are all situated in a specific body, whereas Lord Krishna is maintaining everybody, and as Paramatma is there in everybody's heart. This is what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. Kshetragnam chapi mam vidya. As I told you, there are two souls in our body. One is our soul, and one more is Krishna as Paramatma. Of course, not our soul, it's Krishna's soul only, but he has given us this identity and this existence as as individual entities. And Lord is situated as Paramatma also, along with the individual soul in the same body. That way, God is all pervading, the living entity is localized. But the nature and quality are the same. Right? The central question that you say is, where is the soul and where does it come from? It is the point which, that article it was mentioned. Where is the soul and where does it come from was one question. What is the soul? Prabhupada explained. It is the eternal entity. It is actually situated in the body now. It is, because this body is transmigrating, soul also is transmigrating. And Prabhupada gave dimension of the soul as 1 by 10,000 of a point. Very scientifically, Prabhupada is trying to explain everything. And with regard to where is the soul and where does it come from, Prabhupada answers, it is not difficult to understand. We already discussed the soul is residing in the heart of the living entity and takes shelter in another body after death. So where is the soul? Soul is in the heart region of the living entity. That's what Krishna says. Along with Paramatma, along with soul, Krishna also is staying as Paramatma in the heart region. It's a hint in Bhagavad Gita. He says, Sarvasya chaham hridisannivishta. I am situated in every as Paramatma, where the soul is situated already. In one more place, Prabhupada explains in Bhagavad Gita that why heart region? Why? Because heart is that particular organ in the body where the blood is pumped. Blood is, from various arteries and the veins, the blood is pumped. The blood from the veins is collected and it goes into the heart, purification happens, and the good blood goes into the arteries. That's what the heart is working in that way. So when the blood is going through the heart region, there is a nice description given in the Bhagavad Gita, that the energy from the soul is infused into the red blood corpuscles, because of which we are feeling the life symptoms. When the person dies, what happens? The soul from the heart region is moved out. So because of which the soul is not there, soul is out of the heart region, because of which the infusion of energy into the red blood corpuscles doesn't happen, and because of which the life symptoms are not there in the body. Prabhupada explains very nicely, very scientifically. So like this, we can understand that the soul is residing in the heart of the living entity and it takes shelter in another body after death. Originally, the soul comes from God. So where does it come from? Was the question. Originally, the soul comes from God. Just as a spark comes from fire, and when the spark falls down, it appears to be extinguished. Right? We are all originating from Krishna only, God. For Krishna says, Mamaya Vamsha Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. We are all eternally fragmental parts and parcels, having our existence, our origin from Krishna. It's like the sparks of fire come from the big fire. So when the sparks fall down from the fire, it appears to be extinguished. There can be three different situations, Prabhupada explains. One situation is that, yes, the spark of soul originally comes from spiritual world to the material world. So our origin is from spiritual world actually, as spirit souls. In the material world, he falls down into three different conditions, which are called the modes of nature. In the material world, what is happening is that the soul is under the influence of the three modes. When a spark of fire falls on dry grass, the fiery quality continues. Right? The spark falls on a dry grass, the fiery quality continues. This is one condition, which means basically to tell that when you get a human form of life, the fiery quality of your spiritual understanding, of your spiritual inquisitiveness will continue. In human form of life, you can understand all these things. This is the example which Prabhupada is giving here. When the spark of fire falls on dry grass, the fiery quality continues. When the spark falls on ground, it cannot display its fiery manifestation unless the ground is favorably situated. Same spark falls on the ground, it may get extinguished unless the ground is favorable. The situation with some other entities like animals, right? Because there's no guarantee, there's no surety that they can take up spiritual life. And third situation is that when the spark falls on water, it becomes extinguished. The situation with some entities were totally ignorant about spiritual existence, right? Just like the trees or some animals who are very ignorant about what is this whole purpose. So spark may fall on dry grass, spark may fall on ground, or spark may fall on water. Similarly, if human beings, they are not serious about spiritual life, spiritual understanding, just going on like animals, their spark of spiritual inquisitiveness, spiritual knowledge is all dead. They'll be ignorant. So they'll be getting one more life like an animal or a tree. As such, we find three kinds of living conditions. One living entity is completely forgetful of spiritual nature. We see people absorbed in eating, sleeping, mating, defending, and intoxicating themselves. Don't know what is the purpose of life. Another is almost forgetful, but still has an instinct of spiritual nature. Some people are trying to do some things, trying to follow something. And another is completely in search of spiritual perfection. Like this, even in human society, we see many varieties of humans trying to pursue the different, to different degrees, the path of spiritual perfection. There is a bona fide method for attainment of spiritual perfection with a spiritual spark of soul. And if he is properly guided, then he is very easily sent back home, back to Godhead, where from he originally fell. Very important point Prabhupada is making here. And there's a proper method which Bhagavad Gita describes, which Srila Prabhupada, through his organization of Iskcon, Hare Krishna movement, he has very nicely given all these instructions in a very, very systematic manner. It's called a bona fide method. So a bona fide method for attainment of spiritual perfection by spiritual spark of soul is there. And if you can properly take the guidance from the right people, then he is very easily sent back home, back to Godhead. That's where we originally come from. The question of from where did soul come? Soul has come from spiritual world. That's where our original home is. So if you can follow the method properly of the spiritual attainment, then you will again go back to spiritual world. That is the purpose of this human life. It will be a great contribution to human society if this authorized information from Vedic literature is presented to the modern world on the basis of modern scientific understanding. So if this particular knowledge, whatever Prabhupada is writing in this very short letter, so much wonderful knowledge Prabhupada is giving, if it can be presented to the modern world on the basis of whatever modern understanding you have, modern scientific understanding, that will be a great contribution, Prabhupada is saying. Because in every field of knowledge, this is what you're supposed to look for, search for. In every field of knowledge, you're supposed to understand, finally, Krishna is the controller, Krishna is the master, Krishna is the origin of everything. If your knowledge is going to give this particular understanding and teach everybody in your own department of knowledge, finally to understand Krishna is the source of everything, origin of everything, that is going to give you the proper perspective of life. That is going to give a very wonderful perspective, because right now people only know about intermediate cause of everything. People are not aware of the ultimate cause. Right? The whole Vedic literature is telling us the ultimate cause is the source of everything, the origin of everything. It is sustaining everything. It is maintaining everything. If that is what you are supposed to know, if you simply are satisfied with intermediate causes and not recognizing the original supreme cause, then you are in ignorance always. That is what Prabhupada is saying. Tell us here. That way Prabhupada ends this letter by telling, this fact is already there. It simply has to be presented for modern understanding. Okay. Prabhupada writes, your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. So with this, we close our session today. So thank you everybody for being part of the session. And we will come up with one more new topic next week. Meanwhile, we pray to Lord Krishna that you have a very wonderful year coming forward, which is filled with wonderful spiritual understanding and wonderful spiritual activities, bhakti. All of you please chant Hare Krishna every day without fail. Fixed number of times, at least one mala of Hare Krishna, please chant. That is going to give you perfection in your life. Right? That is what our beginning, that's what our life should be filled with. Because we are supposed to go back to spiritual world, back to Godhead. Right? This is the bona fide method Prabhupada is giving us from all the authentic scriptures. The perfect way of returning back to spiritual world is to chant Hare Krishna mantra every day without fail. So with this, I'll conclude today's session and we will meet again next week. Thank you everybody. Hare Krishna.